Welcome, everyone. I'm pleased to be moderating this panel tonight following this wonderful documentary, which I thought was so well done, Sam. So congratulations on that. So what we're going to do, Alison Holcomb is joining us through via Google Hangout in Seattle. We've heard how difficult it is to convince politicians, and I thought it was very interesting that politicians lag, and Cory, you can chime in on this, lag behind the general public in terms of sort of the attitudes about the way to reduce drug use and consumption and the export of drugs from other countries into the United States. So how do you regulate and educate, and are you confident that that in and of itself will do the trick?
When I was in office, I had the idea that it was very simple to eradicate crops in Brazil, at least marijuana. Brazil is a producer of marijuana, not of cocaine. And you tried. We destroyed in some parts of Brazil, in northeast of Brazil, in a specific region, twice. It's a matter of months, and again, in other parts of the country, in the same part, the crops are there, because it's so profitable that it's almost impossible to stop the production of drugs. When I was in Colombia, as one of the heads of the Commission, Latin American Commission on Drugs, I had a long conversation with the General Naranjo, who was then in charge of the repression in Colombia. And General Naranjo said to me, well, we are killing drug trafficking people, but we're not stopping the traffic of drugs. Because for each one we kill, there are 2 or 3 to replace him, because it's so profitable.
If you look what's happening right now on the marijuana issue in the United States, where we've gone 7, 8 years ago from 1/3 of the country in favor of legally regulating marijuana like alcohol and 2/3 against, to the country being evenly split and even a slight majority in favor, that's about public education. That's about people understanding and learning. Now, on this issue, of course, the politicians have lagged. It's not that some of them don't understand. It's that, as I said in the film, they're afraid. They can see the majority of the public is even in that direction or agreeing with the change, but they're afraid of those ads that might be run, as I said, in the political moment in the campaign. I think also is the thing that brought me to this as an academic was looking at here was all this incredible literature, writing, scientific research, all pointing in this direction. And here was the political direction, the political stuff going in that direction. It was an intellectual puzzle with a powerful moral component and an opportunity to begin to fight a struggle for social justice that was going to take generations, but that would ultimately be about doing the right thing.
Cory, how do you feel about decriminalizing all drugs? We saw that in Portugal and Switzerland and Holland, they're making steps in that direction. Certainly a discussion is now underway, as we saw unilaterally with a lot of countries in South America. What do you think about the prospect of decriminalization?
So first of all, I just have to give a nod to Ethan. When I was not even elected yet, I don't think, or maybe I was a young city councilman, I would come visit his office in New York and start to really learn about what's going on. And now I'm living it. And we're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And we're not only getting this, we're not getting the same results, we're actually getting worse results. And so now we have a reality, I'm just going to use New Jersey where I know, where we're ingraining the injustices in our country, historic injustices in our country, in the present. So New Jersey has 14% African Americans, but our prison population is well over 60% black. And if you look at the life of young African Americans in my city, large percentages of between 20 and 30 are involved in the criminal justice system. If you look at who gets murdered in my city, if we're really concerned about the murder rates, 85% of my residents who are murdered, 85% of the murder victims have been arrested before, an average of 10 times for drug-related crimes. And so I'm one of those guys that says, we got to stop. This is madness. I remember when I first became mayor, meeting with the FBI and talking about this issue, and I said, look, how are we going to solve this problem? And the guy, the head of the FBI at that point, the special agent in charge, said to me, we're not going to solve this problem. This is not something that's going to be solved by law enforcement. And so I accept that now. Law enforcement is not the solution in the sense that we cannot arrest our way out of this problem. And until we start embracing new solutions and new pathways of doing this, we're going to be stuck in the same mire. And what does it do? It takes a city like mine, where my entire property tax levy, which is supposed to be how New Jersey towns run their cities and towns, my entire property tax levy goes to public safety. My entire property tax levy is spent on police, on police cars, on our jail system and the like. So we in Newark are looking for ways to break with the past, and everything from court reform to treatment to prisoner reentry programs, which I can talk about a lot, but I want to stop here. But I just want to say to that question about legalization and about pot is right now the way we are conducting pot in my city is causing incredible death, destruction of lives. We cannot keep doing it this way. And it's time that we start having a national conversation from the White House, frankly, down to cities like mine about what other ways are there to go that can reduce the carnage of human potential.
Sir Richard, what do you think about some of these solutions? Because it seems to me that when it comes to gun control laws, you've got the power of the NRA kind of against that and pressuring our politicians. But what huge force is keeping sort of the country, either public attitudes or politicians themselves, from moving forward? Is it because drug use has been misunderstood and demonized in the past, in your view?
Talking to me?
Yes.
Well, I'm a business person, and the Global Commission is mainly made up of politicians, and I think they wanted to have a business person on who could look at it from a business point of view. Very quickly, having looked at all the facts that the Commission collected together, it was incredibly clear that if this war on drugs had been a business, we would have closed it down within a year of starting it, and realized that it was a dreadful mistake. What we were doing was, effectively, instead of, if our children had a drug problem, or if our brothers and sisters had a drug problem, instead of turning around and trying to help them, we were effectively turning them over to the police and locking them up. And it obviously, in my opinion, was not the answer. And then when the Commission looked at what was going on around the rest of the world, and they saw what was going on in Switzerland, and they saw what was going on in Germany, and they saw what was going on in Portugal, and they saw what was going on in Spain, I mean, it was just glaringly obvious that you do not put people in prison who've got a problem. You help them. And actually, for the vast majority of people, they don't have problems. But for the small percentage of people who do have problems from drink, or from smoking too many cigarettes, or from taking drugs, you help them. And I believe that if you actually start by getting politicians to go out and saying, we're going to treat drugs as a health problem, not a criminal problem, that will get at least 90% of the population agreeing with you. Then if you want to go on to the regulation, okay, it's slightly more divided. But at the very least, I think all drugs, whatever drugs anybody takes, nobody should be put in prison, because the statistics in Portugal show that by helping people, you get on top of the problem. And that's what I would recommend.
Fran?
I also recommend we don't have too long a panel, because I'm sure everyone's going to want to have a drink soon.
Yeah. Fran, along those lines, you talk very movingly, got some applause with that one. You talk very movingly about the fact that your heroin addiction just took years away from you, and you said you lost everything. What do you wish had been in place in those early years when that, I guess, relative of yours gave you that, what turned out to be heroin, to make you feel better?
I think the one thing, if we would have had treatment on demand, I probably wouldn't have used as long as I did. I ended up, that particular day, I ended up using 25 years after that. I believe that if a person could pick up the phone and just make a phone call and say, I need help, and get that help at that particular time, a person wouldn't have to use as long as I had to. So I really feel like treatment on demand is the answer, and instead of prisons.
And Couric, do you just Is it difficult for you to get the funding you need? You know, of course, there's such a lack of treatment for people who have problems. And I am interested where they had, what I think in the film it said something like 213 million people are drug users, but 90% are non-problematic drug users. Yeah, maybe Sam, you can address where you got that information, because I think that's really interesting, but we'll do that in a second. But Cory, is it difficult to get the kind of money you need for treatment programs, say in your city of Newark?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every innovation that we're doing in Newark, there's no money to do it. And so I spend a lot of my time as mayor raising money from philanthropists to fund innovations. And we're actually showing that through the programs, whether they're drug treatment programs, court reform programs, we're actually saving taxpayer dollars. But we can't get the money up front from the government in any way because we just don't have it. And I'll give you one example. We have a reentry program. When men and women come home from prison, they're very rational economic actors. And so if you suddenly have a situation where they can't get identification, where they suffer from background checks of people when they find out they have crimes, they don't want to help them out. When they're barred from doing entire industries, taxi cab licenses, hairdressing licenses, things like that. There's a very rational reason they have to eat, they have to feed their family, that they go back to the easy lure
Right.
of getting involved in the narcotics trade. So we started a program for fathers coming home. We call it Delta Alpha Delta Sigma Dads. It's a fraternity for men coming home, parenting classes, group activities for their kids, bringing them together, because there's an economic disincentive for them to be with the mother of their children, because child support payments collect in arrears while you're in prison. And so we bring them together to work on plans, a very comprehensive program. We've taken the recidivism rate from, in the state of New Jersey, in the 60s, down to about 7%. And so that one small program has saved the state of New Jersey millions of dollars, but we're scraping together the money to get it. In the audience right now is a woman named Ingrid. Wave your hand, Ingrid. Hello, Ingrid. A remarkable woman who helps to run the first and only Office of Reentry for any city in New Jersey. She does an incredible job. The data out of her office is extraordinary for getting people into the workforce, keeping them out of prison. But again, it's an office where her salary is being raised by philanthropy, and it's a big lift to do these things.
Can I ask you just one question? I mean, I'm told that it costs 2/3 more to have somebody in prison than it does to put them through a drug rehabilitation center. So, I mean, if we don't send people to prison and you put all that money that's going into incarcerating people, into helping people, will that not cost you a lot less?
Yeah, again, and you do a wonderful job as a business person thinking in a balance sheet analysis, which is I wish government would. We wouldn't have a lot of the screwed up policies we did if we really looked at the cost-benefit analysis of how we're putting money. So there are some innovators actually here in New York that are doing things like creating social impact bonds. So try to say that if we can save the government $10, let us get a percentage of that so we can upfront that. And I think these are really important experimentations. They're just new in the United States, so we can start breaking some of these vicious cycles that are dragging the human potential to the ground in the United States.
Let me ask Alison out in Seattle. Hi, Alison. I don't mean to ignore you, but I'm wondering, I know that the legalization of marijuana in Washington State, and you're with the ACLU, and you're very involved in that, and that goes into effect, actually, that law goes into effect coincidentally today. What kind of lessons did you learn from that experience that might be applied, say, to a more national stage and changing public attitudes about the way the war on drugs should or shouldn't be engaged in?
Well, I'll start by saying that when we had drafted Initiative 502 here in Washington, we were building on the lessons that we learned from the panelists that you have there this evening. We knew that voters had a lot of fear. It was through their public education that we were able to bring that fear down to a manageable level where we could, we already knew that voters agreed that the war on drugs was a failure, but we also knew that voters didn't know what they could do differently. And so in Initiative 502, we specifically strategized around how we could demonstrate what a public health approach to, in this case, marijuana, could look, with dedicated tax revenues going to prevention, education, research, healthcare. and importantly, dedicated funding for monitoring of implementation of Initiative 502 and a cost-benefit analysis in the year 2015 and in subsequent years, so that we could export information showing that, yes, if you invest in public health strategies, you do have a cost-benefit defense to deciding to do a new approach.
I think part of the challenge, Ethan, it seems to me, and I think that you've seen this, watched this unfold for decades, is to change public attitudes. And I think what I was alluding to earlier, I think that we have been so conditioned, I know I have, that drugs are evil, stay away from drugs at all costs. They're, sort of will result in your demise. And it seems to me that nobody is really willing to have an open-minded conversation about what works and what doesn't. And how do you kind of recalibrate the dialogue in this country, or even initiate it for that matter?
Okay, it's a good question. It really depends upon the specific issue. So on the marijuana issue, this has really come up from the grassroots, no pun intended there. But it has been the public pushing this thing forward, with others putting out the studies and all this, and that's where you're saying the politicians will follow. The politicians will follow. When the issue comes about rational treatment of drug addiction, there what we try to do is look what the Europeans are doing. There it's about fundamentally treating this issue as a health issue. It's about making available methadone and drug treatment and needle exchange to reduce AIDS and hepatitis. It's about prescribing legal heroin to drug addicts. It's about taking policies that are grounded in science, where the Europeans went from where we are to a more progressive, sensible, science-based approach, and trying to educate Americans. When it comes to over-incarceration, that's about building a movement. That's about building a movement of people and families of people who have been incarcerated. That's about using the fiscal arguments with both Republican and Democratic legislators. That's about putting the human interest stories on television so people can look at people spending decades behind bars for a minor drug offense, whereas the murderers and rapists are going out and getting out of prison after 5 or 10 or 15 years. So it's a different approach there. I have to say, being in this for the years I've been, and then seeing first Fernando Henrique Cardoso, who was one of the most distinguished former presidents in the world, and then Richard Branson, who was one of the most famous businessmen in the world, putting this level of time and energy, and joined by all the others we saw in the film, what that's done is to move this issue from the fringes, to give it that element of legitimacy and energy and passion. And when we see current presidents stepping out, not yet American politicians really, especially on the national level, but when we see that, it's because of the work that's been done on all of those levels.
So I think, Sam, you're going to make some closing remarks. Oh, do you want to do questions from the audience? Okay, great. Sorry, I thought you were saying don't do questions from the audience.
Drinks over here any moment.
We have some questions.
Years ago, you would have been put in prison for drinking in America.
Go ahead. You have a question? Hi.
Thank you. Well, first I want to thank everyone for creating this film. It was really great to watch. So I'm new to this issue, and I shouldn't be. Actually, I'm a mother of 5. But I'm listening here, and I don't have the problem, thank God, of any of my kids having drugs. But if I did, obviously I'm all for the idea of rehabilitation. Great idea. But what hasn't been discussed is, are we going to be as lenient or as understanding or as caring and as sort of open-minded about the drug dealers? We haven't discussed that. So what's the punishment? What's the plan of action for the drug dealers? Because that's a different story. These aren't drug users. These are people who are making conscious decisions to spread the drugs to young children. So,
Corey, you want to take that?
I'm happy to talk about it from my perspective. So this is a lot of the incarceration problem, and it disproportionately affects communities like the ones I serve, where there's equal numbers of people dealing drugs. In my college campus, lots of people dealing drugs, but those aren't the people that the FBI is seeking out that were in the ways that you see happening in inner city communities. So there's disproportionate levels of arrest for these folks, and it's not solving the problem. And so what we've tried to do is figure out radically different ways to approach this that achieve more security and safety, and also don't do the kind of things that minority communities are sort of torn about. So you have policies that if you're a young African American man, as I was a long time ago, you're often getting stopped by the police, lying face down on the pavement. I've experienced those kind of indignities, even though you're not doing anything wrong. But I know from the police side as a mayor that the data of, and you hear the argument in New York about stop and frisk, we've got to break this cycle. And a lot of it has to do with racial reconciliation, in my opinion. So the best example we found in the country of a person doing this, and we just started doing it and piloting it in Newark, is a wonderful guy named David Kennedy, who's at John Jay College, who's basically said enough is enough of this mass incarceration of people in their own neighborhoods, fearing the violence from the drug trade and fearing police when they drive by because of what might happen. And we've done programs where we preemptively know who the drug dealers are, bring them into a community meeting, don't have police lecturing them, but have community members talking to them about other options, and actually been showing ways to massively reduce not only drug dealing, but the violence associated with it. If you want to learn more, which I can talk a lot more about it, but you should really go online, look at David Kennedy, some of the success he's had in places from High Point, North Carolina, to other cities around our country.
Ethan, what about if decriminalization? Won't that make it a lot less appealing and profitable for the dealers, obviously?
Well, it really depends. I mean, the answer to what I say, the question right here is the way to put the drug dealers out of business is to allow the people who are addicted to drugs or want to get their drugs to get it from a legal source. Now, what we saw happen in Washington with the great work that Alison did and in Colorado is people are saying, let it come from a legal regulated source. Let's stop putting it in the criminal world. When it comes to heroin, we see European countries and even Canada saying, if you can't stop, if methadone doesn't work, drug treatment, then get it once again from a legal clinic, right? And quite frankly, from the policing issue that Corey's talking about, so long as these drugs remain illegal and so long as people are selling drugs, let's make some distinctions. Most of the people selling drugs are oftentimes people who are addicted themselves. They're selling it to other drug addicts in order to support their own habits. They're not going to schoolyards and doing all this sort of thing. So why should we be locking them up? What greater purpose is served by that? Meanwhile, the greatest drug dealers in the world are probably the alcohol and tobacco dealers, right? And we're not saying criminalize them. We're saying tax it, regulate it, discourage consumption, try to reduce their market. So I think ultimately we need the far more rational approach to dealing with this.
And I just really got to add, first of all, please applaud Ethan. He's an amazing man. Really has influenced my policy thought at a very early and tender age.
And I can't wait till you run against Governor Christie for New Jersey and raise the initiative.
So I just really want to add, just because it is, I don't want to create these characterizations. So at press conference today, hardworking young African-American men and others who are security guard workers who stand on the front lines of safety in my city, protecting buildings that have been targeted by terrorists before, intervening in petty level crime. These are security guards making $7 and change an hour. Now, if you're looking at a lifestyle where you can go get a job that you can't even afford to support your family, where you have to be on things like SNAP and public assistance, you don't have any health benefits, you don't have any retirement plan, versus these other economic alternatives, which can be, not always are. There's a glamorization. Not every drug dealer is riding around in a BMW. That's just not the case. 10 below zero in Newark, you'll see these poor guys standing on the streets selling their drugs. Well, I guess the point I'm trying to make is what Ethan was talking about is very, very important, but we also have to start talking about our country, about having access to living wages by the people that live in our nation. Because if not, there's always going to be that temptation to get into criminal and illegal activity.
Hey, Alison, I'm sorry, audience question. I had another question, but I won't ask it. Anybody have a question in the audience? I'll ask Alison just one quick question. Okay, Alison, real quickly, you hear medicinal marijuana, but you don't really hear about medicinal cocaine or medicinal heroin, really. So, do you see at any point in time the country accepting decriminalizing those kinds of highly addictive drugs and basically choosing to regulate or tax them instead?
Well, I think you want to distinguish between decriminalizing the drugs for the users. And I think that as a blanket of policy across all drugs is the right way to go. There's no reason why anybody should be treated as a criminal for using a substance. But one of the greatest failures of US drug policy has been to treat all drugs the same. So I think you should have a policy regarding regulation of production and distribution that is distinct for each substance that matches the risk profiles that go with that substance. Methamphetamine is very different from heroin, which is very different from cocaine. Some you may want to make available pharmaceutically. Some, there may be other drugs that we would make available, at least in some form, for recreational use, subject to certain guidelines, and invest more in education about the health risks. So I would say definitely possession, decriminalize it for everybody, but with respect to production distribution, let's look at each substance on its own.
Okay. All right, that's great. I think Sam is going to close out the panel.
I just wanted to thank again Jared Cohen and the whole Google Events team for putting on this, and in London as well. So thank you to you guys. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, panel. This is free to the world now for everyone to watch. So if you go on youtube.com/breakingthetaboo-film, if you want to sign the petition, it's www.breakingthetaboo.com. And if you're on Twitter, it's #BreakTheTaboo to join the global conversation. So thank you for coming.